Thanks, Kartik, for this opportunity. It's an interesting way of occupying your time, first of all, during this lockdown. And it's interesting also to know what kind of questions students and young architects are concerned with. Well, architecture is part of our culture, so and there is a culture wherever there is inhabitation in this world. So whatever is born of a place or belongs to a place is indigenous. That would be my very simple definition. Having said that, the indigenous is not some kind of a static legacy of the past. There are constant exposures, influences that history offers. You're all the time presented with new ideas, new challenges, new situations, new technologies, and cultures change. What is important is to see how we manage those changes and not believe in some kind of a golden static era in the past, which we could call as the indigenous. Well, practice and teaching have both been an important part of my life for many years now. The desire to practice started many years ago. I was a child. We used to go to Goa to our family house, and I kind of sensed that the architecture of that place was responsible in many ways. It contributed in many ways to the well-being of the people there, and I thought it would be great to kind of be involved in that whole process of making spaces, making places. I must have been in the 8th standard or 7th standard or something like that. My venturing into teaching was quite a chance. I was invited by one of my own professors, Olivier Juga, in Paris to assist him as a studio assistant. He thought I would be a good teacher because he said I was witty, and that was an important quality for a teacher. So I should thank him for that judgment. The journey from being a studio assistant in 1991 in Paris to being a professor at the Academy of Architecture in 2020 has been a long and steady one. I have enjoyed it. I hope that my students have enjoyed it as well. To me, both these aspects are important. Practice has its own challenges, its own rewards. There is a certain sense of immediacy, urgency in what you do. Clients expect you to give them advice on very specific questions, and they expect you to do that very quickly. So that's where your expertise is tested. Teaching is different. A lot of these questions that the client expect advice on are not necessarily the focus of the teaching. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the architecture course is a 5-year course. It's a long course because it's a complex discipline. It takes time for students to kind of find themselves, position themselves. As a teacher, I think it's important for me not to convince my students about my point of view, but try and guide them to form their own point of view. Give them a certain there is a skill and the knowledge which is one part, but there is also this kind of a overall position with regards to how you look at things, and that is why I think the role of a teacher is critical in opening up those horizons. My work in the academy for the last many years has been in many ways carrying forward the legacy of the school. The idea is not to be like a mold that creates a particular kind of students or students who think in a particular way. I don't think that's the role of an institution. I think a teacher is more like a gardener. He should be able to allow students to flourish in what they have in them. I mean, they have different qualities, different strengths, and as a teacher, you should allow them to explore them and develop them rather than force them into some kind of a pre-decided idea of what you think a good architect should be. So to me, ideally, if I was to design a pedagogy for the world today, it would be a pedagogy that is focused majorly on studio work, and which would, more importantly, create a lot of free time for students to work with an architect or work with any other place they would want to work with, to look around, to observe people, observe how things work around them, travel, read, visit exhibitions, do a whole lot of things that can inform them, inform their design attitudes. So that would be an ideal pedagogy for me, one which is not only focused on formal learning but also creates time and opportunity for learning outside of the institution. Firstly, I am aware that lots of people are facing many more hardships than me. So architecture is a difficult profession, but it's also an extremely pleasurable one. There's immense joy in practicing architecture. Like any creative discipline, it's not an easy practice. If you are honest and true to your profession, then it's really not easy. But there is a plaisir d'architecture, as the French say it. There is fun in practicing. What keeps me going is that there is a pleasure in the process of design. I mean, there is a joy in eventually seeing people evolving in an environment, in a built environment that you have helped in creating. That's a kind of satisfaction that very few other professions can give you. It's difficult, but it's also humbling. It's a profession that keeps you on your toes. It makes you meet different kinds of people, from a casual laborer at site to some big shot CEO for whom you may be doing some work. So all in all, it's a fun profession. It kind of keeps you connected to what's happening around, and it's a good place to be in. The design process should start with questions, questions that intrigue you, and there's really no need for those questions to be external. You don't really always need a client to start questioning things. You can, as an architect, create projects for yourselves, choose the questions that bother you. Depending on what those questions are, you may be able to rally other people around them. If not, I mean, if your questions are kind of very, very personal or esoteric, then you can't blame other people for not sharing your concerns. So first thing for me is that you should have concerns. You should have a kind of idea that architecture is primarily a social project, that unless you have an idea, kind of utopia in your mind for society around you, architecture is difficult. To me, architecture is a kind of expression of that utopia. If you are lucky enough to have a client with a project, then I think it's important that you are able to identify questions. The client comes to you with a stated purpose. Every project has a stated purpose. As an architect, it's up to you to identify other questions, other purposes which may not necessarily be stated. How you can enrich the project, how you can add value to it in ways that may not have necessarily been recognized by the people who are commissioning the project. So that's how I would think a design process is. There are different kinds of issues that a project may bring up. How you address them, how you identify them, and then make sure you address them is what the design process is about. The client comes to you with a stated brief. He has a certain number of things that need to be achieved through the project. I think it's your job to kind of expand that, look at other issues that may be concerning that project. The issues could be about the context, either the physical context or cultural or social context. The questions could be about technology, about the program, how you can enhance or enrich the program, or they could be purely aesthetic. So it's up to you to create an architectural brief that goes beyond the basic functional brief that the client may come to you with. In some parts, it's a very individual experience that you have to kind of immerse yourself into the environment of the project and try and come out with some interesting, identify interesting questions and also try and identify possible solutions, but also be ready to collaborate with other people, recognize that you don't know everything about everything. That there are certain areas where other people have an expertise that you don't have, and so your job is also kind of to make sure that your approach is able to get all these people together and to try and collectively add to that brief that the client comes to you with in a meaningful way. Each project can be broken up into specific components. There are components of cost, components of technology, components of construction methods, building material, etc., etc. But ideally, a good project is when all that adds up to something more than the individual components, where the whole experience is more than its individual parts. Today's age, it would be kind of foolish not to recognize the impact of digital technology or information and communication, telecom, etc. In many ways, it is making our work simpler. Especially, I remember when I started my career, we used to spend a lot of time drawing, and we used to spend a lot of time drafting written documents. We don't do that anymore. I think a lot of the digital tools are kind of saving us from all the grinding work, which is good. Kind of keeps your mind and energies focused on the critical aspects of your work and not the donkey work, if I may say so. So there are a lot of things that can help us make decisions. There are a lot of softwares, a lot of simulations, which can, like I said, I can either help us make decisions or it can help us confirm what our intuition kind of is pushing us towards. We can test what you want to propose, and you have a fairly good assessment of uh, what your intuition is pushing you towards. So obviously, I think it would be uh, we must use all those tools, and it can cover a whole lot of fields: climate response, information, data about the physical environment, acoustics, thermal quality, air quality, and whatever. I mean, a whole lot of fields, even very much more complex things like crowd management, traffic management, transportation. So there are softwares and applications that give you a very specific insight and confirmation of your design, whether it is working or not, even before it is built. And I think all of us should be using those tools. It kind of reduces the possibility of a mistake, and we must use that. At the other end, I also feel that these are tools. I mean, these are not. These are tools that we use to do what we do. They will, over a period of time, also influence what we do and how we do things. But they should not be leading us, or they should not be misleading us into doing things that the tool is kind of conducive to do more easily. I don't know if I'm clear, but what I mean, digital tools have a certain way of analyzing data, approaching data, and proposing solutions. We should not look at that as a facility. We should keep our critical senses alive and give priority to them, because there are a lot of things that consciously or unconsciously our mind may be processing without necessarily being fully aware of what the exact responses are. So it's important to really look at these as tools and not as our masters. From a purely aesthetic perspective, I very strongly look at architecture as a counterpoint to the digital environment. I mean, our world is increasingly populated with digital information, digital screens, all kinds of digital equipment. I look at architecture as a kind of clearing in this digital forest. I think architecture has the ability to make people be more aware of each other, more aware of nature around them, and also probably more aware of themselves. I do believe that architecture has that potential. It's a very strong agenda in the kind of work we do. But people are just people. There are no local people and not local people. People are just people. Well, we have to convince people through our work. I mean, we have to be articulate enough about our thoughts so that they are convinced about. You can convince people to trust you. And finally, you have to create work that confirms that trust. I mean, if you look around, you can see why people do not really trust us, because there is not enough good architecture around us. People have very limited expectations. People expect architects to primarily address legal, technical, and economic issues. And I believe that we have to do that first, and then to do more. And that more is what people will appreciate, because the first few things they were expecting in any ways. So I think it's up to us to kind of create our credentials, convince people that architecture is an important discipline, that the quality of the built environment matters, and we can really only do it through our work. In my work, I've always tried to stay away from any predefined priorities. I have tried to approach each project as if it was my first one, so that I'm really able to identify the priorities that matter in that project, look at things with a fresh perspective. Like I said earlier, projects have a stated purpose, and your job is to enlarge that, widen that purpose and try and enrich it with all other opportunities that you can enrich it with. It is a tightrope. It gets quite hectic sometimes, but I have no complaints. I have enjoyed every bit of whatever I've done for the last few years. It's a very fulfilling life. More than me, I'll do this as long as I can, but I would like to say that more than me, it is being the cooperation of my colleagues and the management at the college, of my colleagues in the office, in my practice, and also my family members who have kind of allowed me that space to engage in this kind of multifaceted life. So without their understanding and cooperation, this wouldn't have been possible. However much I would have wanted to do it, it wouldn't have been possible. So it's hectic, but it's a good life. Well, if you look at the judgment itself, it's a pity. I would have hoped that our learned Supreme Court judges would have a better understanding of what architecture is and how different it is from construction. But I don't blame them for not having that understanding, because once again, look around us and we see that most of what construction seems to give us some kind of delight or some kind of pleasure is not been built in the recent times. Very little of it. So I think it's not fair for us to kind of demand respect through legislation. I think we should command respect through our work. So I would urge the entire design and architecture community to create meaningful work that people can see, people can appreciate, and people can value. And only then they would be ready to kind of recognize the contribution that the profession makes. In my practice as well as at the college, we are trying to engage with public work, trying to improve the quality of the designs and the construction that happens in public projects. And I think that is important, because otherwise, as a profession, we will continue to service a very narrow minority of clients. It may work well for us as architects, but it may not work well for the discipline of architecture at large. So I think we have to create that value. We have to create enough good work for people to be convinced that this is a profession that deserves support and due credit. Thank you.